My wife, Sarah, was my whole world. For 7 years, I thought we had it all. A loving marriage, a beautiful home, and plans for a family. Life wasn't perfect, of course, but I figured no relationship ever was. Sarah's bond with my sister, Chloe, was one of the things I'd always cherished. They'd become close friends, which made family gatherings warm and easy. But that closeness was where it all started to unravel. It began with subtle things I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't so tuned into Sarah's moods. She seemed nervous at family dinners, avoiding eye contact with Chloe while still acting overly friendly toward her. At first, I chalked it up to a misunderstanding. Maybe they'd had a disagreement they weren't telling me about. But then came the whispers. One night, I overheard Sarah on the phone in the bedroom. She spoke softly, her words cutting through the silence of the house. "He can't know about this, not yet," she said. My stomach twisted, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was something about work or a surprise she was planning. Still, it didn't sit right. The real blow came a few weeks later, during a game night at my sister's house. Chloe handed me her phone to show me some photos of her new puppy, and as I swiped through, I stumbled on a picture that didn't belong. It was a blurry shot of Sarah and a man I didn't recognize, sitting too close for comfort in what looked like a bar. My chest tightened. "Who's this?" I asked, holding up the phone. Chloe froze, her face flushing red. I don't know. Probably an old photo from her friends or something," she stammered, snatching the phone away. It was an obvious lie, but I didn't press her right then. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, but the worst one wouldn't go away. What if Sarah was cheating? I hated even thinking it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. I needed answers, so I decided to do something I'd never done before. I checked Sarah's phone. It took me 3 attempts to figure out her passcode, but when the screen unlocked, my heart pounded in my chest. There were messages from an unsaved number, and they weren't the kind of texts you'd send to a coworker or friend. "I missed you today," one read. "Last night was amazing," said another. The world tilted. My hands shook as I scrolled further. The timestamps matched nights Sarah had claimed to be working late. The worst part? One of the messages mentioned my sister's name. "Chloe almost caught on," it read. I couldn't breathe. My wife wasn't just cheating. My sister knew about it. I didn't confront Sarah right away. I needed to figure out the full story before I made my move. For the next week, I acted normal, even as my insides churned with betrayal. I wanted to give her the chance to tell me the truth, but every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, I felt like I was being stabbed in the back. Then, out of the blue, Sarah announced we should go on a weekend trip, just the two of us. "We need some time to reconnect," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the first time in our marriage I felt nothing when she looked at me. I agreed to the trip, but in my head I was already planning something entirely different. The tension on the second night at the cabin was unbearable. I could feel Sarah watching me, trying to gauge if I was really buying into her act. I played my part, smiling at her jokes, complimenting her cooking, and pretending like we were a normal couple, just enjoying some time away. But inside, I was boiling. After dinner, while Sarah went to the bathroom, I finally got my chance. Her duffel bag sat near the couch, partially unzipped. My heart pounded as I reached for it, half hoping I'd find nothing and that all of this was just paranoia. But as soon as I pushed aside her clothes, I saw it. A second phone, tucked into the side pocket. I froze, staring at the device like it was a live grenade. A second phone? There was no innocent explanation for this. My hands shook as I powered it on. The lock screen came up immediately. No password. That almost made me laugh. She'd been so cocky, so sure I wouldn't snoop. The screen lit up with a message. "See you Monday. Don't forget the excuse." The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it from the texts I'd seen on her other phone. My throat tightened as I opened the messaging app and scrolled. The conversation was worse than I imagined. There were flirty texts, plans for meetup, a few photos. She hadn't just been cheating. She'd been planning a whole other life with this guy. By the time Sarah came back into the room, I was sitting on the couch with the phone in my hand. She stopped in her tracks when she saw me holding it. Her face went pale. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice low and cold. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, trying to sound confused. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. I've seen the messages, Sarah. I know everything, so who is he, and how long has this been going on? For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then the tears started. I didn't mean for it to happen, she sobbed, sinking onto the couch. I felt like we were drifting apart, and he was just there for me. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for how selfish she was being, but instead, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. And Chloe? I demanded. Does she know about this? Sarah's tears stopped instantly. Her face hardened as she looked up at me. Chloe doesn't just know, she said quietly. She introduced us. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister had set this up? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why would Chloe do this? I didn't even bother replying. I packed my bag in silence while Sarah sat there, still crying and trying to explain herself. But I wasn't listening. I couldn't. The person I thought I'd spend my life with had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and my sister, someone I'd trusted completely, had been part of it. I left the cabin that night, driving back home with nothing but anger and betrayal swirling in my head. But the worst part was knowing I couldn't just walk away from this. I needed answers. The next morning, I showed up at Chloe's apartment unannounced. She opened the door, looking surprised to see me. Hey, what are you doing here? She asked, her smile faltering when she saw the look on my face. We need to talk, I said, brushing past her into the living room. I know about Sarah. Chloe's face went pale. What do you mean, she asked, her voice shaky. Don't play dumb, I snapped. She told me you introduced her to the guy she's been cheating with. Why, Chloe? Why would you do that to me? For a moment, she just stood there, speechless. Then she started crying. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, sitting down on the couch. I thought maybe if she was happy with someone else, it would take the pressure off you. You've been so focused on work, and she kept saying how lonely she was. Her words made my blood boil. You thought the solution was to set her up with another man? I shouted, how is that helping anyone? How could you do this to me? I didn't know it would turn into an affair, she cried. I thought they'd be friends or something. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Her excuses meant nothing to me. She'd betrayed me just as much as Sarah had, and there was no way to fix that. I left her apartment without saying another word, slamming the door behind me. Over the next few weeks, I focused on untangling my life from Sarah's. She moved out of our house, and I filed for divorce. I also cut Chloe out of my life completely. I couldn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't interested in hearing any more of her excuses. It wasn't easy, but as time passed, I started to feel lighter. Losing Sarah and Chloe had been painful, but it also gave me a chance to rebuild my life from the ground up. I focused on myself for the first time in years, and it felt good. Months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Sarah's new relationship had already fallen apart. The guy she'd cheated with wasn't interested in anything serious, and she ended up alone. Chloe tried to reach out to me a few times, but I never responded. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living for myself. The betrayal had hurt, but it had also set me free.